Chapter 4, Tuesday, March 20th, 1984. Murky brine churned violently under an avalanche of boulders. Hydraulics hissed and the dump box slowly lowered back into position while other dump trucks waited in line. B.J. Holtz felt mesmerized, watching small waves pound against the new Great Salt Lake Breakwater project. Somewhere below, to disappear from memory, he was sure, were the white oolitic beaches he'd known all his life. As if thinking similar thoughts, Norm Sutton, with his sideburns, which probably hadn't been trimmed since Nixon was in office, his button shirt straining against his gut, and his coat and tie flapping in the wind, clasped his hands behind his back and said, 20 years ago you could walk a half-mile out there before reaching water. Remember that? You bet I do, B.J. said, tucking his scarf tighter into his jacket. Got my '56 Chevy stuck in the sand right out there. He pointed at the gray water that reflected a heavy dark sky. Had to hitch a ride back to town to get shovels and boards to get her out. Good times, Norm said. I still remember the old Salt Air Resort. When the giant racer would carry you to the top, it would clack. You mean clickety-clack? No, just clack. Norm raised his hand, making a slow arching motion. Clack, 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 clack. We'd get on the Dodge and bumper cars, you know. I remember the time we watched a guy try to put the cork in a pint of whiskey he had in his back pocket. It sloshed all over the place. He was so drunk. My buddies and I, we fell over laughing. B.J. smiled. You old enough to remember that? Norm asked. A lone seagull hovered in place against the wind. B.J. watched it break away and fly south toward the marina. He said they closed it by the time I was old enough to care. I drove out to watch it burn down, though. It was a cold November night. You could see it from the east side of the valley. When I arrived, I could feel the heat all the way to the road. Stayed all night to watch it. By morning, it was just black twisted steel and smoldering pilings. You know, my grandparents won a dancing contest in the big pavilion. They'd tell that story, and I'd imagine those shiny wood floors. They'd take the excursion train on the Salt Lake, Garfield, and Western back and forth from the city. What a shame it's gone. Norm shook his head, and words came from somewhere under his mustache. Nowadays, not even a piling can be seen. What do you say, Gordy? B.J. yelled at a lone figure who stood staring in the opposite direction, toward the area where the tailings met the highway in the west point of the Ochre Mountains. The guy always seemed to have something on his mind. With his overcoat pulled up tight around his neck, he turned and approached B.J. and Norm, but not without one last thoughtful look at the mountains. I say it's cold, Gordy Rushton said, joining their little group. We're talking about the old Salt Air, Norm said. Gordy smiled and faced the waves as they rolled in and erased the past. I never saw it. It was gone by the time I visited the lake. Wasn't something filmed here, some old movie? What was its name? Norm looked at the ground and scratched his head. B.J. snapped his fingers and pointed at Gordy. Carnival of Souls. Yeah, that's it, Norm said. I watched it one night, B.J. said, still pointing his finger. It come on TV along with The Exorcist. Loved it. You're twisted, Norm said. Chap Breeze, president of the West Ochre Council, approached from behind and, placing one hand on Gordy's shoulder and the other on B.J.'s, asked, Mind if I join you folks? Be our guest. The view's great, Norm said. Another load of boulders thundered into the water. B.J. could feel the concussions under his feet like small earthquakes. Too little too late, he said, feeling as if his words disappeared behind the noise. The newly built Salt Air State Park, hardly an echo of the former resort, vacant and lonely under damaged Moorish towers, stood as a sad testament to deteriorating construction standards and man's prideful quest to conquer nature. The thought of cold salt water sloshing over brand-new hardwood floors made B.J. sick. We told them 2 years ago the lake level fluctuated, Norm said. I don't think anyone expected it to rise this much. Now they'll spend millions more in tax money to try to save it. Already lost the water park. I get the feeling they'll never put it back up. How high will they raise the road, Norm asked. Charles also stared in the direction where the old Salt Air once stood. 42.9 above sea level. I hear the eggheads at the university are saying higher than 42.10 by the end of the year. 4210, B.J. asked. Yeah, 4,210 feet above sea level, Norm said. I know that, but where are they getting their figures? They're eggheads. Ask them. Besides, I was at a meeting where they showed evidence the lake had reached as far as where the airport sits today, but they estimated that to be about the time the Declaration of Independence was being signed. Norm tipped his head in the direction of the engineer, who stood with the other group from the council, looking official in his white hard hat. Like I said, we were the first to tell them the lake level fluctuated. Brace yourselves, here they come, Charles said. The two factions in the council momentarily faced each other as armies on the field. Rosa Jean DeMed, affectionately called Sarge by her friends, called other things behind her back by the rest of the council, authoritatively led the other half of the council, the white hard-hatted engineers representing the Breakwater Project, a Kennecott suit, and the county commissioners to where Charles' group overlooked the old salt air site. That's right, let him come to you, chap, BJ thought, watching Charles stand his ground. Rosa Jean stopped, smiled, and raised her hand in the direction of the approaching engineers. I thought the council should be privy to the information that was just shared. Chap, I'm sure you've met Bill Watterson from the engineering firm. Bill shifted a clipboard and said, Chap, how's Ruth? They warmly shook hands. BJ felt himself smirk with satisfaction. She's wonderful. I hear your boy made the varsity baseball team this year. Knowing the coach at Skyline, he's probably got him out on the field already. Rosa Jean smiled her diplomatic smile, but her eyelids lowered a little in Chap's direction. She took in an imperial breath and said, He brought up a good point, that the East-West Railroad Causeway should be breached as soon as possible. A federal permit was just issued to the Department of Natural Resources to place fill in conjunction with the breach. The alleviation of the rise in water on this side of the lake would bring much quicker success to the Breakwater Project. Her grave-faced council member minions nodded with respectful appreciation. The fact that that particular morsel of information had already been discussed on the news wasn't lost on BJ, nor it seemed on his companions. Gordy cleared his throat, then said with slow, careful words, It could drop as much as 1.5 feet and eventually equalize the salinity, though that wouldn't happen overnight. The lake sections have had years since 1959, when the causeway was built, to reach their present saturation levels. Notice our end is over 3 feet higher and less salty, Gordy said. That's an astute assessment, the engineer said. Have we met? He reached out a hand to Gordy, and they shook. BJ noticed Andrea Delfini, Rosa Jean's fawning shadow, as a subtle sneer formed on her lips. She had faced off with Gordy as Rosa Jean had with Chap. He's our resident high school janitor, Andrea Delfini said. He represents the new neighborhoods being built near the rodeo grounds, the Upper East Side, you might say, Chap said. It's a pleasure, Bill said. Rosa Jean turned dismissively from Gordy. I say we move on to the looming Kennecott layoffs. Chap cleared his throat. I move that we adjourn this meeting and address that topic when we have all parties present. I second that, Norm said. Now hold on, Oliver Weissman said, stepping forward. His wrinkled eyes squinted. I think this is a pressing development that needs to be addressed immediately. I represent the unions on this council. They're the voice of the workers being shafted. Oliver, we have that on the agenda for the next meeting. We should also talk about the proposed incorporation of Magna. How long do you want this special meeting to go? Chap asked. The next meeting's a month away. We don't have time to dilly-dally. I agree. We also don't have time to do things the wrong way. I agree with Chap, Gordy said. What can we do here, anyway? We have a month to prepare. Kennecott has a right to have its reps present, and... Excuse me, but I wasn't talking to you, Oliver said. I've been on this council for 25 years. I grew up in Garfield. My father was a smelter worker. I was a smelter worker. I don't need to be lectured by some newcomer. Gordy clasped his hands behind his back, looked down, and rocked on his heels. Andrea's smile widened. If you'll excuse me, Bill said, and walked away with the commissioners. I would love to have a small discussion on both the layoffs and the incorporation, Rosa Jean said. Oliver nodded in satisfaction. Chap cleared his throat, then said, What good do you suppose it would do us here to get into another argument? We should wait for more public comment. We've had plenty of comment, Rosa Jean said. There's also been plenty of misinformation being disseminated about city boundaries and how high people's taxes will really go without Kennecott and Hercules. I beg your pardon, BJ said, but who's sending out misinformation? The study's still being done. The city boundaries haven't been settled upon. There's still the question of Copperton joining the incorporation. And what about taxes? We've heard plenty of hype from you people about how high they'll supposedly go. You're not concerned about higher taxes. It's really about maintaining a political majority in cahoots with your cronies at the county. Rosa Jean laughed. Cronies? Oh, come now. Once again, Chap said, putting some muscle in his voice. I motion we adjourn. I second that, Norm and BJ said simultaneously. Meeting's adjourned, Chap said. You didn't finish the vote, Oliver said. Aye, Gordy, Norm, and BJ said, raising their hands. Ayes have it, Chap said. What about the nays? And I didn't hear you vote, Oliver said. Aye, Chap yelled, walking toward his car. Maybe we ought to have a closing prayer, too, Oliver yelled. BJ glared at Oliver, who was famous for his hostility against Mormons, and who knew Chap was a Mormon. Anyone for Mexican food? Norm asked. Taco Time's got a casita burrito on sale. 3 tacos for 99 cents. I'm stopping at Bill's Lounge for a drink, Oliver hollered, his voice flying away in the wind and mingling with the seagulls. Gordy, who'd given BJ a ride, walked silently toward the parked cars. BJ caught up with him and patted him on the shoulder. What is it with you and Delphine? Ex-girlfriend or something? Gordy laughed. You kidding me? Hey, we're on for taco time, BJ yelled. Norm sent back a thumbs up. You wanted some taco time, didn't you, BJ asked Gordy. Do I have a choice now? Gordy smiled. No, BJ said. He walked along quietly, but when they reached Gordy's truck, he said, But you two work together, don't you? She's a teacher. I'm a custodian. You act like you knew her. She says things as if bringing stuff up only you'd know about. We go back a ways, nothing particular. She's just not the kind of person I'd want to hang around. But you knew she was on the council before you ran. That's one of the reasons I ran. Sounds like a love story to me. Gordy laughed. He opened the passenger door for BJ, then walked around and opened his own door. Inside, BJ blew on his hands and rubbed them together. Gordy's door shut away the lake wind and encapsulated them in what seemed like near silence. He looked at the trinkets that dangled from the rearview mirror. Stamped in an old strip of leather, which had both ends woven in boondoggle, were the words Warlock and Dolphin. Well, no matter what those jerks say, we're glad to have you on the council anyway. As Gordy put the truck into gear, he smiled, but then the smile faded behind that thoughtful look he always had. Chap waved as he drove by. Gordy circled and passed Rosa Jean's car, a new Lincoln Continental, which had a green and white bumper sticker that read Carter Mondale. Delphine's 1976 BMW had a Greenpeace bumper sticker on one end and a peace sign on the other. BJ grunted. What was that? Gordy asked. Nothing. BJ took a deep breath, and the gray lake beat against the new road. Chapter 5, Saturday morning, March 24th, 1984. Since they weren't going to move again, Grandma had decided Donnie and Corey needed the full Magna Historic Pleasant Green experience. Mom had actually agreed to let Grandma hire one of the young women in the ward, ironically Kendra Farnsworth, the gum-chewing, large-boned girl from his social studies class, to babysit while Grandma took Mom, Corey, and Donnie on a ride through town. Donnie thought it was funny that Mom seemed to feel the need to bribe him with a movie to go along. Of course, he had to take Corey with him, but it was still a movie. They took a road that went past a large red brick church, Magna Elementary, Ken's sandwich shop, and the distant Brockbank Junior High. Why don't we go the other way? Mom asked. Grandma slowed down, put on the blinker, and turned the wheel, and the car carried them onto Buccaneer Drive. I want to see how the new building is coming along. Maybe Donnie would like to see where he'll be going to high school. I've already seen it, Donnie thought, but wasn't quick enough to speak. Mom's tone of voice took on weight. I was hoping you wouldn't do this. Bear with me for a few minutes. I don't plan on staying. You always want to rub it in. Grandma's hands tightened on the wheel, but her voice remained steady. We've gone way past that. You forget this was my school, too. I've never considered it mine. A thick silence filled the air around them as they bounced over the curb and into the auditorium parking lot. The side of the dark pyramidal building stretched up against a cloudy sky. This wasn't here when I went to school. There used to be a street and a store right there. Grandma pointed to where the construction met the auditorium. Bucks, they called it. They had the best ham and cheese sandwiches, took the crust off, pressed them, and wrapped them in tinfoil. Pizza puffs, Mom said quietly. A tiny smile appeared on Grandma's lips. Donnie relaxed. Donuts, Grandma said. Cokes and donuts, Mom said, as if trying to hold back a smile. Cherry slushes. RC Cola with a lemon twist. I could use an RC Cola, Donnie said. Corey looked bored and said, I want one too. I guess we should get going, huh? Grandma said. But what do you think, Donnie? You looking forward to high school? Not really, he said, but stared at the new building, which looked bland, modern, and nearly finished, except for the landscaping equipment. None of this was here when I was a kid, Mom said. My world's gone. Grandma was quiet again as they pulled back onto the street. They turned west on the road by the tennis courts. Donnie watched the football field go by and thought of cheerleaders. Winding through other neighborhoods, Grandma pointed out where Donnie's great-grandparents' farm used to be. Then she crossed the canal and took them up Cemetery Hill to the Pleasant Green Cemetery. When they reached the old metal arch, they pulled over. The sky was still heavy with clouds, but Donnie could see all the way across the valley to Salt Lake City. Dad isn't very far away, Grandma said. I'll stay in the car, Mom said. Grandma lost her smile. Corey opened his door, and the cold air blew in. Donnie stepped out and tried to avoid the muddy puddles in the road. Grandma walked carefully to a granite headstone. Donnie thought it was strange for her name to be carved next to Grandpa's when she wasn't dead yet. The only difference on Grandma's side was a missing death date next to her birth date. You boys have pioneer ancestry up here, Grandma said. She went on about the town's split personality, how the name Magna wasn't the town's real name, but a mask that eclipsed the true heritage shoved aside by foreign opportunistic forces unconcerned with the preservation of the town's original vision. From the 1850s to the 1880s, 2 groups of Mormons had settled the area. Several pioneer families, including Abraham Coon's posterity, established Coonville in the hills to the south. Those who settled in the north, building farms along the wagon trail that would become Main Street and on the flats near the freshwater marshes, called their town Pleasant Green. She described a little house on the prairie community of farmers, ranchers, and small business owners. 3 generations of peaceful and prosperous existence, until the turn of the century brought with it the mining and smelting industry. Along with the other residents of Coonville, Grandma's father sold his property to the powder company, which would make dynamite for the copper mine. Sold it believing the new railroad that would go through it would bring business. Instead, it brought only lumbering, greasy ore cars. His neighbors, who also sold out, were told their property would be used as ostrich farms to raise quality feathers for women's hats. 1906 sealed the end of an era when the Utah Copper Company broke ground for the new Magna concentrator on the western foothills overlooking Pleasant Green. With it came a new sort of folk, with their bars and shacks and crime and violence. No roots, only drunken labor and hostile attitudes toward the original settlers, who were pushed ever eastward until they became a community divided. Then one day, in the little post office in the confectionery on the highway south of the mill, the new postmaster made a fateful decision to name the post office after the industry on the hill, and not after the town. He was part of a tiny group of businessmen who, in a backroom meeting, voted to name the new commercial district also after the mill. No input from Pleasant Green's townfolk, who gave up their farms to work in the smelters. Hardly a whimper as 3 generations of heritage blew away with the stroke of a pen. The thousands of newcomers would all believe they lived in Magna, not Pleasant Green. As a commercial center, Magna Main Street bustled and flourished. Then, after the new highway drew away passing traffic and a mall was built in a nearby city, it slowly died, choked by the same disease that killed off main streets in small towns all across America. Trash-filled alleys, run-down houses, drugs, labor union strikes, all festering over the memory of the once quiet and peaceful world that only a remnant of the oldest generation remembered. Donnie taking Grandma's right arm, and Corey taking her left, the 3 walked to an old rusted fence that overlooked a deep canyon she called the Wash. After she told about the flood of the summer of 1930, Donnie separated from the trio and followed some tire ruts to an outcropping of rock that overlooked the valley. There he imagined jumping a bike off it and felt a strange feeling in his stomach, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and horror. He threw a rock at the sky. It made a whirring noise until it clicked and cracked against other rocks below. Corey picked up empty shotgun shells and bottle caps. "This is where we used to go sledding," Grandma said. "My cow was killed by lightning not far from here. Take my arm." The three of them walked back down the hill to the car. Corey found some empty vodka mini bottles. After taking the caps off to smell the insides, he smashed them against a boulder. "That's a rude mess," Grandma said. Corey seemed to ignore her. Donnie thought he acted toward her as he'd seen Mom do, and it made him angry. After letting a silent moment go by, Grandma said, "There are two types of people in this county. Some think the American pie is the taxes the government loots to feed itself with. The rest want to bake their own pie. I love homemade pie, don't you?" Donnie nodded and thought about apple pie. He hoped she'd make one. She went on. "This is why we need to be our own city. We don't want to lose our heritage like Granger and Hunter did when West Valley City was created. I think we should take back our old name, Pleasant Green. But the unions and the council and the county don't want to give up what they think is their piece of the pie. They keep telling everyone taxes will go up. The truth is the folks who shouldn't be in power but are would lose it. Those who are smart enough to see that we should be free to make our own rules and make it easy for businesses to flourish and could articulate that clearly would fare better politically. You make it easy for businesses to grow, jobs will be made, and enough taxes would be generated to run just enough government to take care of our own needs." She lost Donnie at about American pie, but he politely listened. When they reached the car, Grandma told Corey to leave the pile of shotgun shells behind, but Donnie saw he managed to smuggle an empty mini bottle into his coat pocket, probably thinking it would be fun to shoot a pellet gun at it. Down at the corner of the last road at the end of town and Main Street, Grandma stopped at a stop sign, and while she lamented that the county was planning on demolishing quite a few of the older buildings, including the old Palace Hotel, the fire hall, and the old First Security Bank, Donnie looked at the trees beyond Webster Elementary School. He felt an overpowering urge to get out of the car and go explore. Something about that area below the foothills called to him. The car began to move, and he turned in his seat and cranked his neck to watch it go by. When they parked in front of the Gem Theater, Grandma told them a few stories about Saturday matinees, cartoons, newsreels, and penny candy. Finally, Mom handed Donnie and Corey $5 each and let them out. "Thanks, Mom, Grandma," Donnie said. Grandma leaned over Mom to speak through her open window. "You're good boys. Have fun." Corey put his hands into his pockets and looked at the ground. Behind Donnie, someone said in a mocking tone of voice, barely audible, "You're good boys." Snickers. He turned to see who'd spoken as Grandma drove away. Sitting in the window were 4 boys. Behind them were posters for War Games, Sudden Impact, and The Rescuers. A sign read, "Monday night family night, $5 per family, free popcorn." "What are you looking at?" one of the boys asked. He was the tall kid from the locker incident. "Nothing," Donnie said. He nudged Corey toward the door. The tall kid stood up, said something to his buddies, glanced around in a suspicious way that made Donnie think he might be making sure adults weren't nearby, and then approached. An odd look in his eyes. He had a cruel, arrogant smile. Donnie held the door for Corey and was about to follow him through when the tall kid leaned forward like an old friend and held the door, blocking Donnie's path. "Hey," Donnie said with a cautious nod. For a moment, the tall kid didn't say anything. He glanced at Corey, who stood at the ticket counter, and Donnie felt trouble coming. "I asked you what you're looking at, faggot." The tall kid's friends gathered around the doorway. Donnie recognized a couple of them, Travis, Marty, and Greg Hunt, who he didn't care for, but then again he never had anything to do with them. The third kid could have been James Healy, but he wasn't sure. "Nothing, a movie poster. What's it to you?" "I don't like being looked at, faggot." "You're a faggot, aren't you?" Donnie's legs felt weak and his heart pounded. He held out his hands questioningly. He's Donnie Fish. I seen him at school, Travis Smarty said. He also sported an arrogant smile, but stupidity made his eyes small. A follower, Donnie thought. Dangerous. I gotta go, Donnie said, and made to duck past the tall kid, who quickly shoved him against the glass door. Hey, leave my brother alone. He didn't do anything, Corey said. Donnie's first reaction was to swing a fist at the tall kid's face, but he stopped himself when he saw the way he looked at Corey and how the other boys seemed to be eager for a piece of the action. Fish, the tall kid said. More like Guppy, Greg Hunt said, and let out a nervous titter. No, the tall kid said, his smile growing under dead eyes, the face of a stoned comic. He's a carp. Look at those fat, ugly lips. He leaned forward, his face tauntingly close to Donnie's. Carp. Shaking and face feeling hot, Donnie tried to step away, and the kid shoved him again. Hit him, Chad, Travis said. Chad. His name is Chad. Donnie looked from one to the other, calculating that if he hit Chad hard, he might gain a few feet of advantage, but where would he run to? A man stepped out from behind the ticket counter. Hey, you kids take that elsewhere. Chad let go of the door. Travis and Greg ran. The third kid had already left. We didn't do anything, Corey said. We just come here to see a movie and they're starting stuff. As Chad backed away, he told the man what he could do with himself, using his middle finger as sign language. The man stepped outside. Chad ran. You want to say that again to my face, you little punk? The man yelled. That's what I thought. Donnie moved inside. Corey stood, shaking, his money clenched in his fist. When the man came back in, he paused to look at Donnie, then at Corey. I ain't going to have any trouble from you two, am I? No, sir, Donnie said. Red-faced, the man grunted and motioned for Donnie and Corey to follow him. He exchanged some of their cash for 2 tickets to war games, then sent them into the small lobby. Donnie spent the rest of his money on flicks and a Coke. Corey bought popcorn. Posters for coming attractions adorned the walls. Donnie took a moment to study one for Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, then another for Gremlins. Both movies he wanted to see. The rest of the posters advertised movies from the year before, like The Dead Zone, Christine, Flashdance, Staying Alive, and Eddie and the Cruisers. It'll be just a few more minutes, the lady at the counter said to a new group of kids who walked in. Her voice was scratchy from too many cigarettes, but she sounded nice. Corey sat down on a bench by some old black and white photos of stars like John Wayne and Elvis. He still seemed upset and occasionally glanced at the window as more people went by. Donnie sat beside him. You should have kicked his ass, Corey said. I wanted to, Donnie said. Corey silently worked on his popcorn. The lady behind the counter called for everyone's attention. Please don't forget to turn in your ticket stubs for the raffle. You can win any of the prizes along the wall behind the counter. She pointed at some plastic army men, a kite, a sticker set, some free coupons for popcorn and soft drinks, and a dartboard. Corey stood up and took his ticket to the lady. Donnie waited a moment, thinking his chances of winning anything were as good as getting struck by lightning, but then he followed his brother and did the same with his ticket. The lady took it and smiled. When it was time to go in, the man who'd been at the ticket counter opened some burgundy curtains and motioned for people to enter the theater. When they entered, Donnie saw there was a balcony. He looked at Corey and tipped his head upwards to guide his attention in that direction. Hell yeah! Let's sit up there, Corey said. Moving against the flow of people, mostly kids close to their age, they walked back into the foyer and looked around. How do you get up there, Corey asked. Donnie shrugged his shoulders, but then saw the stairs by the entrance of the ticket counter. He walked that direction, Corey in tow, then stopped and swore. Blocking the stairs was a sign that read, Kids under 18 must be accompanied by an adult. That sucks, Corey said. Donnie looked out the door and noticed Chad and his buddies had returned and were hanging out across the street. They stood in a group, smoking and kicking what was left of the slushy snow along the sidewalk. Feeling nervous, he walked back into the theater. The previews had started, and it took him a couple of minutes to find a decent seat. That was them guys again, wasn't it? Corey whispered. Yeah. Donnie immediately put his feet up on the seat in front. So did Corey. The theater had an old-fashioned feel to it. In the front, where the rows ended, was a stage. The screen was flanked by curtains that had probably been parted while Donnie and Corey had been out looking for access to the balcony. During a preview for a movie called 16 Candles, Donnie made gagging noises when he saw Molly Ringwald and said, She looks like a waver. Corey laughed, so Donnie made the sounds a little louder. Someone a few rows ahead hushed him. He held up his middle finger, which made a strange sort of silhouette against the lighted screen. Corey shoved his face into his coat to keep from laughing out loud. The feature film about a teenage computer hacker and military computers with artificial intelligence was interesting enough to keep both Donnie and Corey quiet. Donnie thought the actress, Ali Sheedy, who played alongside Matthew Broderick, was hot. The movie he really wanted to see was Splash, mainly because he thought he might see Daryl Hannah's boobs. The gem wasn't playing current releases, so since the car was out of commission, if he wanted to see any newer movies, he'd have to find a way to earn more money and then take the bus into West Valley City, two things he felt he didn't want to bother with. After the movie, they waited in the foyer once more for the lady to read off the winning ticket numbers. Donnie pulled out his stub. The lady read off a sequence of numbers. A girl buried in a group of kids standing by the counter squealed and jumped up and down. She'd won the sticker set. Not wanting to waste any more time, and also wanting to see if Chad and his friends were still outside, Donnie flicked away his stub. He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets and moved through the crowd to the door. The lady's voice disappeared as he stepped outside. He thought they might be around the corner, so he briefly looked there. No one. His breath made little puffs of steam in the gloomy afternoon. A Chevy Nova, jacked up in the back, peeled out at the Holiday Oil and shot up one of the neighborhood streets. He returned to the warmth and the smell of perfume, popcorn, and something a little stale that must have been the old building. "Hey," Corey said, lifting a package above the crowd. "No way, you won." "No," he said, holding it out for Donnie to take. "You did." "Whoa, what do you mean I won?" "It was your ticket. You threw it and I picked it up. Cool, huh?" "What is it?" Donnie took the package and looked in. It was the dartboard, and a nice one at that. He scratched his head. "Dude, do you want to share it?" "I guess." Donnie handed it back to Corey. Cautiously pausing outside under the marquee, he could see that place at the end of Main Street where the foothills began. "Want to go exploring?" he asked. Corey, dartboard under his arm, looked around, probably worried they might run into those bad guys again. "I don't know. Maybe we should go straight home." "Dude, let's go check out that place down there." Donnie pointed to the west end of the street. "What's down there?" "Cool stuff, like hills and all that." Donnie started walking. Corey waited a moment, then hurried to catch up. "What if you get us grounded?" "For what? Mom didn't say we couldn't go anywhere." "But what if they're expecting us home?" "How long is it going to take? We're here now. Let's go check it out." From time to time, Corey glanced behind him. Donnie did too, but the closer they got, the more secure he felt. His feet picked up speed, forcing Corey, who was several inches shorter, to jog at times. They passed old buildings, crossed streets, and took turns trying to jump up to hit street signs. When they reached the end of Main Street, they paused and looked at the old Webster School. Its white bricks seemed to glow against the cloudy sky. "So now what?" Corey asked. Donnie pointed at the fence at the edge of the playground. "We go there." They crossed the road on a diagonal course that took them to the front of the school. Their feet hit small piles of slush that splashed over the sidewalk. Not a minute had passed before they were in an all-out slush fight. Corey jumped back, trying to avoid the assault as Donnie stomped on one pile after another. Soon Corey gave up and dropped the dartboard to make snowballs. Donnie followed suit, but his enthusiasm was low. He dodged a few of Corey's throws, threw some back, then walked toward the playground. When Corey caught up, he said, "Okay, so we're here. Can we go back now? It's getting cold." Donnie didn't say anything. He looked at the way the hills abruptly raised at the edge of town. A chain-link fence spanned the entire school property and didn't end at the road, but kept going into the distance. He followed a section of it for several yards, and a need to get to the other side, increased, almost like the need for breath. "This place is lonely," Corey said, looking around. Donnie wove his fingers into the cold chain links. At the moment he committed himself to climb, he glanced back at Corey, who was walking back toward the street. "Where are you going?" Donnie yelled. Corey stopped and turned. "Home." "No, wait, we're like right here. We can check this place out." "I want to go home," Corey whined. "Why?" "I'm scared." Feeling a jab of anger, Donnie continued to climb until he was almost to the top. He looked at Corey again. His dark blue coat and faded jeans blended into the grayness of his surroundings. He looked small. Those bad guys could still be out there, somewhere between home and here, Donnie thought. Feeling unforgiving, he nevertheless climbed back down, made a snowball, and threw it over Corey's head. It splattered in the parking lot. Corey didn't respond. Before he ran to catch up with Corey, he glimpsed movement out of the corner of his eye. A white horse galloped over a hill, then disappeared in the trees. $10 wasn't the best take for the day, but it was something. Marge just had to send out more positive energy and the people would come. Word was already getting out that a real female shaman was established on the west side of the Salt Lake Valley, if established meant working out of a rented kitchen. She held the bill in the candlelight and felt the urge to burn it. There had been a time when she would have, for she had believed that such urges and whims were divine guidance. To burn the bill would be an affirmation of everything she believed, or thought she did. It would be a reminder that capitalism and the greed that drove it would eventually become nothing but ashes. But it also reminded her that she had to eat. Phil, her longtime companion, had landed a new job at the gravel pits, and how long that lasted would probably depend on whether or not they started drug testing, as they were threatening to do. He wasn't about to give up his sweet leaf for the man. So she folded the bill and tucked it into a little wooden Chinese luck box, a semi-offering to the gods and the cosmos. And maybe if they just held it until she needed to spend it, instead of receiving it as an incense offering, she would be allowed more. Guilty memories of the days she used to trust in the flow of karma and the universal consciousness for her sustenance made her fingers feel dirty. Food and basic necessities had once fallen upon her like manna from heaven when she begged in the streets of San Francisco, until Child Services threatened to take away her son-child, a.k.a. Chad Eaton, according to a paper filed away in some office in San Francisco County. Still not free of the cloudiness she felt, she went through the sliding back door and breathed the smell of a thawing yard recently dominated by dogs. The landlord hadn't cleaned it up before renting to the new tenants, but Marge wasn't going to let that bother her. She would clean it up, all in good time, and eventually extend her services outdoors, where she could use burning sage to clear away the negative energies. She already had the spot picked out where she would set up a teepee for privacy, and next to it the hibachi to burn things without the fire department swooping upon her. Though she should have been gladdened by the changing trees and the hazy evening beauty of the western mountains. The ochres, she thought they were called. The inner cloudiness increased until it felt almost like a physical weight. Things weren't right, and it showed in her aura. She felt the aura more than saw it, though from time to time she got an impression of colors. The problem was being able to step far enough away from self to determine if the colors were her own, residuals left behind by former dwellers, or the people around her. Perhaps it was a combination of all three. Chad came banging through the door along with his friends. Their adolescent male energy flooded the duplex like a storm, clouding her even more. Without bothering to say hello, they thundered down the stairs, swearing and shouting. Through the living room window, she glimpsed a car backing out of the driveway. Two shadows, probably those Dumas boys, sat in the front seat, mixing with an already darkening stew of energy. What had they been up to? Reacting to an unconscious revulsion from the sour atmosphere, she slipped away to her bedroom. Though the bed was bought secondhand at the Deseret Industries, a place she'd come to associate with the Salvation Army stores, it was comfortable and clean, better than the mattresses and sleeping bags she'd spent so many years sleeping on. Perhaps a bourgeois luxury she didn't necessarily have to feel guilty about. Crystals and shining beads hung against the window, bringing in the last of the sunlight and other positive energies. She lit an incense stick and jabbed it into a pewter holder shaped like a mouth open in agony. She stripped off her clothes, sprayed herself with herbal water, then sat on her meditation rug in the lotus position. Several minutes passed. Noises from downstairs of video games and male boisterousness passed through the uninsulated floor and the dusty heat ducts. Even in her room, her private place, charmed and set apart from the rest of the house, she couldn't relax. The darkness continued to press in upon her. A cleansing was what she needed. Since she'd run out of sage to burn, she chose to do a crystal healing with a clear, well-formed, natural piece of quartz. She'd rather have been in a Native American holy place in the desert or on a mountain, anywhere in nature, really, than the sterile, energy-modeled suburbs she tried so hard to avoid for so long. A spark of annoyance at Phil for having landed a job at all added to the negativity around her. She lay on the bed. Then, tilting her head back, she balanced the crystal over her third eye, or brow chakra, that little place on her forehead above the bridge of the nose and between her eyes. After taking a few deep meditative breaths, she imagined light gathering from the cosmos around her and passed through the crystal to fill her whole being. But no light came. Instead, the voices from the basement became more aggressive. Words like carp and pussies and kill punctuated with the foulest uses of profanity she thought she could imagine. Granted, she'd never believed in stifling her son's self-expression through limiting his words, even in the face of social convention, the tyranny of public school. But something extra harsh came through, startling her with its depth of violence. Along with her gift of being able to sense energies, there also came images, and as the boys' voices assaulted her sensitivities, strobing visions of oppression and brutality came and went. Forcing herself to clear her mind, she made one more attempt at cleansing her astral being. She imagined the darkness like a mist being blown away by the fresh mountain air, the purest morning breeze before the first hints of sunlight. Yes, that's it. The symbolism of the universe. Rebirth. Renewal. Ignoring the darkness, she concentrated on the rays of light. She desired to approach the nascent sun, a journey to the east. Startled, she felt herself enter that ecstatic place she normally didn't find without heavy fasting and meditation, along with a little helper, a hit of LSD or peyote buds. A sensation of reality tearing away like a call. Then behind her, where she couldn't turn to look, she still sensed the darkness. It hadn't blown away, but formed a terrible vortex. She tried to force herself awake, as if from a dream, but the darkness seized upon her. Opening her eyes, she still saw her comfortable room soaked in a mellow dusk left over from the sunset. Her ears heard only the boys and their video games, but inside, the astral energy pulled at her with the intensity of a jet engine. Then a soft voice, like a lover's whisper, touched her ear, the same voice she'd first heard during the drugged orgies of the commune, then later during a vision quest outside a small ranch near Death Valley, addressed her by her most intimate and hidden name, Moonchild. Her soul tried to scream in the silence and stillness of her room. Tormented and maddened by the overwhelming power, she abandoned herself to it in perfect submission. She thought she would instantly be swept away into oblivion. Instead, she was shown a reward of power and prestige. Thousands would pilgrimage to her doorstep just to be in her presence. Gifts of money would fall at her feet. Celebrities and politicians alike would grovel for her public blessings. A true shaman and guru finally recognized for her gifts. A rainbow prophetess of peace and social justice. Another vision filled her as she felt herself carried beyond the room. She caught a glimpse of her body lying on the bed before she stared into the sky and an infinite barren universe. Feeling a sensation of rapid travel, she looked out over the horizon. The Great Salt Lake reflected the remaining dirty yellows of the sky. Below her, a pattern of house lights and street lights and moving headlights blew past, and then she saw the lights of Kennecott Mill and Powerhouse. Below them was a dark space, like a sea, but then she understood it to be a large swath of vacant property, except for a silver canal and a pond near the outer edge. In an instant she was down in the trees, hovering over a wounded and suffering boy, and without articulating a single question, she already knew the answer. She was failing her mission. Before she could generate another thought, a light, like a fire, flashed out and covered the boy, a light that caused her to shrink back in revulsion at the illumination of her innermost self. As if pulled by a silver strand, she retreated at a blinding speed. Without her having closed her eyes, the infinite became finite, from otherworld to darkened bedroom and sweaty sheets. Getting up and steadying herself into the hall, she made her way downstairs. Greg tapped Chad's shoulder. Without looking away from his video game, he said, "What?" "Did you find him?" Marge asked. Chad played on without answering her. Greg looked uncomfortable. "I asked you a question," she said more sharply. "I guess," Chad snapped back. "Donnie the fish," Travis said. and laugh.